The first thing my husband took was the air out of the room. Not metaphorically, literally. The courtroom felt smaller the moment he stood and cleared his throat, like the walls leaned in to hear what he was about to claim. He did not look at me when he spoke. He looked at the judge, at his lawyer, at the papers in his hand. Confident, organized, certain. He listed what he wanted in a voice so calm it bordered on polite. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, the dog. He said it the way someone reads an inventory, as if each item already belonged to him and this was just a formality. I said nothing. The judge glanced at me once, then again. Her eyes lingered longer the second time. She was waiting for something, a correction, a protest, a sound. I gave her none. My hands were folded in my lap. My back was straight. I kept my face neutral. Silence can be a powerful performance if you know how to hold it. My name is Maribel Knox. That matters later. It did not seem to matter to anyone in that room. My husband finished speaking and sat down, satisfied. His lawyer nodded. The judge adjusted her glasses. Somewhere behind me, I heard a quiet shift in the gallery, the sound people make when they expect a reaction and do not get one. Everyone assumed the same thing, that I was in shock, that I had been worn down, that this was what defeat looked like. I let them believe it. When the judge finally asked if I understood what was being proposed, I met her eyes and said yes. One word, clear, calm, final. She hesitated, just for a moment, like she wanted to ask me something else, something off the record. Then she nodded and moved on. The sound of her pen on paper felt louder than it should have. That was how it looked at the end, like I had given up. The truth is quieter. I met my husband when I was young enough to confuse admiration with love. He was older, confident, already convinced the world was going to reward him eventually. I was the kind of woman who believed effort mattered, that if you showed up consistently, things would balance out. In the beginning, he loved that about me. I was reliable. I remembered things. I filled in the gaps he did not see. Over time, that reliability turned into expectation, then into entitlement. I became background noise in my own life, the person who handled details so he could handle applause. When he started his business, I helped him set it up. When he forgot deadlines, I remembered them. When he needed someone to smooth things over, I did it. I learned early that my usefulness increased the quieter I became. He liked telling people I was supportive. He did not like acknowledging that support had a spine. Somewhere along the way, his favorite sentence became a refrain. You would not survive without me. He said it casually at first, like a joke, then more often, then always, when we argued, when I disagreed, when I hesitated. It was not a threat. It was worse than that. It was presented as a fact. I did not scream. I did not fight. I adjusted. That is how erosion works, not with impact, but with repetition. By the time he told me he wanted a divorce, I was already smaller in ways that were hard to see from the outside. He spoke about separation like a business transaction, clean, efficient. He assured me he would be fair. Fair, in his language, meant what remained after he took what he believed he deserved. And now, here we were, in court, with witnesses, with paperwork, with his confidence filling every corner. I could feel the expectation pressing in on me, that I would finally crack, that I would beg or argue or explain myself, that I would try to convince someone I mattered. Instead, I stayed quiet. That unsettled him. I saw it in the way he finally glanced at me, just once, searching my face for something that was not there. Fear, anger, desperation. He found none of it, only stillness. Everyone thought I was surrendering too easily. They were right about one thing. I was giving him everything he asked for. They were wrong about why. I did not disappear all at once. It happened in increments so small they felt harmless at the time. A task I took over because he was busy. A decision I deferred because he sounded so sure. A question I stopped asking because the answer always came with a sigh. Inside our marriage, I became operationally invisible, essential but unseen, like wiring in a wall. If it works, no one notices. If it fails, everyone blames it. I handled the finances because numbers made sense to me and irritated him. I organized the taxes because deadlines annoyed him. I managed the accounts, paid the vendors, reconciled statements late at night while he slept soundly beside me, convinced the world was bending toward his brilliance. He liked telling people he hated details. He liked even more that I loved them. What he never understood was that details remember things people forget. At first, the work felt like partnership. Then it felt like maintenance. Eventually, it felt like surveillance. The night everything shifted was unremarkable in every visible way. He came home late, tossed his keys on the counter, complained about a client, and fell asleep before the television finished its opening credits. I stayed up because I always did. There was a discrepancy I could not quite place, a small transfer that did not align with the pattern I knew by heart. I told myself it was nothing, then I checked again, then I opened another statement, then another. Time collapsed the way it does when truth begins to surface. I sat at the dining table with a cold cup of tea and followed the numbers where they led, not dramatically, not frantically, just steadily. The story they told did not match the one he performed so well in public. There were gaps, overlaps, movements that made sense only if you stopped believing the version of him that smiled for cameras and leaned back confidently at dinner parties. I did not panic. That surprised me later. I felt something closer to clarity, a quiet internal click, like a lock turning. I did not confront him. I did not wake him. I did not cry over spreadsheets or spiral into fear. I closed the laptop, washed my cup, and went to bed beside a man who thought I was asleep to everything that mattered. From that night on, I changed how I moved through the world. I asked fewer questions, not because I had fewer thoughts, but because questions warn people they are being observed. I listened more carefully. I took notes in places no one would ever think to look. I learned which comments made him talk longer, which silences made him fill the space. I let him explain things to me that I already understood, nodding in the right places, playing the role he expected. Being underestimated is a discipline. It requires restraint. You have to swallow the impulse to correct, to clarify, to prove. You have to let people believe you are slower than you are, softer than you are, less informed than you are. It is uncomfortable. It goes against instinct, but it buys you something invaluable: time. Over the years, I watched his confidence harden into carelessness. He stopped double-checking. He stopped reading fine print. He assumed I was managing the boring parts while he handled the important ones. He never realized that boring is where truth hides, in ledgers, in timestamps, in patterns that only appear if you are patient enough to watch them repeat. Outwardly, our marriage continued its slow decay. He spoke over me. He dismissed my concerns. He repeated that sentence whenever I hesitated, the one he loved so much. You would not survive without me. I let it land without reaction. I let him believe it had power. Inside, something else was growing. Not anger, not revenge, something colder and more durable. Understanding. I documented what I saw without interpretation. I did not label anything yet. I did not decide what it meant or what I would do with it. Decisions made too early are fragile. I simply collected dates, amounts, accounts, patterns. I became a witness in my own life, quietly assembling a record no one else knew existed. The pressure was building, though no one could feel it yet. That was the advantage. Everyone thought I was shrinking. No one noticed I was concentrating. I knew I could confront him at any point. I knew what would happen if I did. He would explain, deflect, charm, rewrite. He always did. And then he would adjust his behavior just enough to hide better. So I chose something else. I chose to wait. Moving out felt like stepping out of a life that had already decided I no longer belonged to it. I packed quietly, taking only what I was told I could have, folding clothes with the same care I used to fold our shared future. He stood in the doorway once, arms crossed, watching me load boxes like a man supervising a delivery he had already paid for. He did not help. He did not need to. This was his victory lap. I moved into a smaller place across town, the kind of apartment people describe as temporary, even when they know it will not be. Friends called constantly. They were outraged on my behalf. They told me to get angry, to get aggressive, to get a better lawyer. They said I was being foolish, that I was letting him walk all over me, that I would regret being so passive. I listened, nodded, thanked them for caring, and did nothing they suggested. Concern can sound a lot like pressure when it is loud enough. His family was worse. They treated me like a woman who had failed a final exam everyone else passed. His mother asked if I had tried hard enough. His sister offered advice in a tone that assumed I needed guidance on how not to ruin things next time. At gatherings, people spoke to me slowly, gently, like I might shatter if they used full volume. I accepted their sympathy without correcting their assumptions. I let them believe the story that made them most comfortable. I learned quickly how to look defeated without being broken. I softened my voice. I let my posture collapse just enough to read as resignation. I stopped making eye contact in rooms where he wanted to feel tall. It was not acting in the theatrical sense. It was alignment. I matched their expectations so precisely that no one questioned what they were seeing. He told people I was being reasonable, that I understood my place in all of this. He framed my silence as agreement. He framed my restraint as weakness. Behind the scenes, I was building systems. I separated accounts cleanly and legally, following rules to the letter. I documented every conversation, every offer, every revision, writing summaries that looked like personal notes but read like evidence. I asked questions that sounded naive and listened to answers that revealed more than he realized. I let him explain things slowly, proudly, filling the space with details he assumed were unimportant. Some conversations were almost laughably harmless on the surface. Casual remarks about timelines, offhand comments about assets, small clarifications that made him feel helpful. Each one left a trace. Each one confirmed a pattern. He never noticed how little I volunteered in return. His lawyer did. It started with pauses, requests to revisit figures, gentle suggestions to slow down. He brushed them off with a wave of his hand, reminding everyone that he knew his own business. He was in a hurry to finish, to be done, to move on to the life he had already started imagining without me in it. He wanted closure. He wanted speed. Speed is expensive. I agreed to terms that made mediators uncomfortable. I nodded when they asked if I understood. I said yes without hesitation. The fewer obstacles I presented, the faster everything moved. That was the point. He wanted momentum. I gave it to him. People around us grew increasingly confused. They waited for me to explode, to suddenly demand fairness, to pull a dramatic reversal. When it did not happen, frustration replaced sympathy. They wanted catharsis. I gave them disappointment. He mistook that disappointment for defeat. As his arrogance grew, his attention shrank. He skimmed documents. He stopped reading attachments. He signed things without asking questions because questions slow things down, and he believed there was nothing left to learn. He began boasting about how smoothly everything was going, how lucky he was that I was not difficult like other women. Difficulty, in his mind, was noise. He did not recognize silence as resistance. By the end, the trap was finished. It did not look like a trap. It looked like surrender. It looked like a woman giving up more than she should, smiling politely while being erased. That was the brilliance of it. Everyone thought they understood what was happening. They were all watching the wrong thing. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a combination that always made me think of things being erased and preserved at the same time. The air felt dry, recycled, like it had been breathed too many times by people waiting for outcomes they could not control. I sat at the table beside my attorney, hands folded, spine straight, breathing evenly. Across from me, my husband looked relaxed, almost bored. He had already decided how this would end. When the clerk passed the documents forward, the sound of paper sliding across wood seemed louder than it should have been. Page after page, neat stacks, precise margins, language dense enough to hide entire lives between commas. This was where everything we had built and everything we had broken was being translated into ink. The judge reviewed the summary and looked up at me again. Her expression was careful, professional, but something in her eyes shifted when my requests were read aloud. I was giving him the house, the accounts, the investments, everything that had once been called marital. In return, I asked for very little. A modest settlement, clean separation, no prolonged disputes. She paused, pen hovering above the page. I could feel the room lean toward that pause. "Mrs. Knox," she said, measured and deliberate. "Do you understand what you are agreeing to today?" I met her gaze and nodded. I understood it better than anyone in that room. "Yes," I said quietly. She searched my face for something, perhaps hesitation, perhaps fear. I gave her neither. After a moment, she exhaled and continued. "The law does not exist to protect people from their own decisions, only to ensure those decisions are informed and voluntary. On paper, mine were." My husband did not look at me. He was already reaching for his pen, confidence humming through him like a current. He signed quickly, flipping pages with the impatience of someone eager to be finished. His watch caught the light as he moved, flashing briefly, arrogantly. I watched his hand, steady and sure, writing his name again and again as if repetition alone could reinforce ownership. When the papers came to me, I took my time. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to feel each page beneath my fingers. The texture of the paper was slightly rough, expensive, designed to last. I signed where indicated, careful strokes, no tremor. My silence had carried me this far. I was not about to break it now. The mediator cleared his throat. The judge reviewed the signatures. Everything appeared in order. The room relaxed, collectively exhaling, as if the hardest part was over. It was not. As procedure demanded, the final documents were passed once more down the table, this time for verification. My husband leaned back, folding his arms, victory already settling into his posture. His lawyer, however, did not lean back. He leaned forward. He read more slowly now, brow tightening, lips pressing together as his eyes moved from line to line. I noticed before anyone else did. At first, it was confusion, a slight tilt of the head, a return to a previous page. He checked an attachment, then another. His pen hovered, forgotten, above the margin. I could almost see the calculation begin, the mental math rearranging itself as assumptions collapsed. My husband noticed the delay and frowned. He murmured something under his breath, irritation flickering. His lawyer did not respond. He was too busy reading. Then came panic. It moved fast, sharp, and unmistakable. Color drained from his face. He flipped pages with urgency now, no longer careful, no longer composed. He leaned closer to my husband and whispered something I could not hear, but I did not need to. I watched the words land. I watched confusion turn to disbelief. "What?" my husband hissed, too loud, too sudden. The judge looked up, attention snapping back to the table. His lawyer whispered again, pointing at a section buried deep in the paperwork, the part no one ever reads once they think they have won. Liability, obligations, numbers that do not sparkle, numbers that endure. My husband reached for the document, scanning frantically. His jaw tightened, his leg began to bounce beneath the table. For the first time that morning, he looked at me. Really looked. I met his eyes and gave him nothing. The room held its breath as the judge leaned forward, sensing the shift. The air felt thinner now, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. My husband opened his mouth to speak, then closed it, then looked back down at the page as if hoping it would rearrange itself. It did not. The judge's pen hovered above the bench, waiting for the final step. One breath remained before everything changed. The gavel came down once, sharp and final, and the sound cut through the room like a door slamming shut. The judge did not raise her voice. She did not soften it either. She stated the ruling with the same steady cadence she would use for any other case, because that is what this had become. Ordinary, procedural, finished. The document stood as signed. The agreement was valid. The liabilities attached to the assets transferred as written. There would be no revision, no delay, no reconsideration. My husband stared at the bench as if language itself had betrayed him. He tried to speak, but the words arrived out of order. He said he had not understood. He said there had been a mistake. He said things that sounded like excuses, because that is what they were. The judge listened long enough to confirm there was nothing new being offered, then stopped him with a single raised hand. She explained patiently that understanding is not required for a contract to be binding, only consent. He had given that freely, with counsel present, with opportunity for review. There was no sympathy in her tone. There was no cruelty either, just clarity. The realization hit him in layers. First disbelief, then anger, then something hollow and quiet that settled behind his eyes when he finally grasped the scope of what he had claimed. He had taken the house, yes, but also the loans tied to it. He had taken the accounts, yes, but also the obligations buried beneath their balances. He had taken control, and with it, responsibility. Every weight he had ignored now belonged to him alone. I watched him sit back in his chair, shoulders slumping, the shape of victory collapsing into something smaller and far less impressive. For the first time since I had known him, he looked uncertain, not confused, uncertain, the kind that seeps into posture and breath. The judge declared the marriage dissolved. The clerk gathered the papers. The room began to empty with the quiet efficiency of people who had already moved on. No one lingered. There was nothing left to debate. I stood, gathered my bag, and turned toward the door without waiting for anyone else. As I passed him, he said my name, low and strained, as if saying it might still change something. I did not stop. I did not need to. The moment had already passed. The aftermath unfolded quickly, almost impersonally. The house went first, then the accounts. The reputation followed soon after, as reputations often do when numbers stop cooperating. People who once praised his ambition began using different words. Careless, reckless, unprepared. Success evaporates faster than failure when it is built on assumption. There was no sequel waiting for him, no comeback arc, no hidden reserve of goodwill to draw from. The consequences were not dramatic. They were administrative. Notices, deadlines, conversations that ended early, doors that did not open. That was the end of his story. Mine became quieter. I returned to a life that fit me instead of swallowing me, a smaller space, fewer obligations, decisions that belonged to no one but me. I learned the pleasure of choosing paint colors without compromise, of arranging furniture without permission, of waking up without the low hum of someone else's expectations running beneath my thoughts. Peace, I discovered, is not loud. It does not announce itself. It settles. People asked if it felt like revenge. They wanted a word that made the outcome feel sharp and cinematic. I never found one that fit. Revenge implies intent to harm. What I felt was alignment. The truth meeting the structure designed to hold it. Choices landing where they were always going to land once they were no longer protected by distraction. Betrayal is not rare. It is a pattern. It repeats in marriages, in friendships, in business, wherever power and trust share space. So does its resolution, not through shouting or spectacle, but through patience, through attention, through letting people take exactly what they ask for. I did not destroy him. He did that himself, line by line, signature by signature. I simply stopped standing in the way. Stories like this are everywhere. Most of them end quietly, long after the audience has stopped watching. The trick is not forcing the ending. The trick is waiting long enough for it to arrive on its own.